Hey everybody, welcome to Byte Pro. So today what we're going to be doing is building out an instance of Apache Guacamole. So Apache Foundation released version 1.1 back in January of this year, 2020. So today we're going to be building out an instance of that. This guide, this is for CentOS 7, and I've got a minimal install running right now on a virtual machine. So to begin with, what we're going to do is I'm just going to connect into my Guacamole machine. I'm sorry, my CentOS machine. Okay, so now that I'm SSH into the machine, what I'm going to start with is I'm just going to change the host name. This step isn't really required, but it's just, I like being able to see what machine I'm working on readily when I SSH into them. So we're going to name host name, CTL, and then set that host name to guac. And then we can disconnect and reconnect real quick just to see that we indeed, guac was set as the host name for this machine. One real quick note, I'm running this as root, so if you're running this from a non-root account, make sure you put sudo in front of each of these commands, otherwise you're probably going to get errors saying you don't have sufficient permissions to do a lot of these things. So next what we're going to do is we're going to install EPEL. So the EPEL repositories have a lot of packages we need, and so that's why we're going to install these right now. Okay, and what we're going to do next is just run yum update. Just make sure we have the latest updates of everything. Now, I already ran yum update recently, so that's just to save time, so you guys don't have to see this, but it'll probably take quite some time on your system to go through and update all the packages. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we have one more repository we need to install. So Guacamole relies on the FFmpeg packages, and they're not natively included with EPEL or the default CentOS repos. So I'm going to copy and paste this in here. And if you look in the description, I have a link to my website where I actually have all these commands written up in a guide, so you don't have to hand jam all this stuff or manually type it. You can just copy and paste from the website. But we're going to run yum to install a repo, and we're actually using RPM Fusion, their free release. So we're going to install that. Okay, great. So now we have all the repositories installed that we need. So next what we're going to do is we need to install our dependencies. So let me place these in here real quick. Okay, so we're going to run yum install, and you can see there's a whole bunch of dependencies here, including Tomcat and MariaDB. So we need all these to actually build out and install Guacamole. So I'll go ahead and run that. And again, depending on how fast your internet and computer are, this could take quite some time. Okay, so now we've installed all of our dependencies. What we're going to do next is we actually have to download the Guacamole server source code. So I'm going to run wget, and we're going to download this tar file. And these are, again, coming straight from the Apache servers. Next we need to do is just extract that tar file. Okay, and then we have to wget one other thing. So we need to get the .war file for the Apache server. So this is the URL. Okay. So next what we're going to do is we're going to hop into the Guacamole server folder using cd, and then we're going to run configure. What this is going to do is this is just going to prepare Guacamole to be compiled. So it's going to run through a whole bunch of checks, and when you get done with this, if the previous steps we did, installing EPEL and all of our other dependencies and the RPM Fusion repos, if those all worked, you should see this. So you should have yeses across the board in every category, with the exception of WSOC32. That's if you were compiling on Windows, which we're not. We're on a Linux system, so that's fine that that says no. If you have any other no's, go back to the earlier in the video and just make sure you got all the dependencies and packages you needed prior to this step. You're probably missing something if one of these say no. Okay, so now that we've run configure, what we need to do is actually compile the Guacamole server and then install it. So we're gonna run make install. And depending on how fast your computer is, this probably will take a little while. Okay, now we're back. So it's finished compiling. Now we're gonna run ldconfig, and then we're gonna hop back to our home directory. Okay, so next what we're gonna do is we're just gonna make sure that Tomcat, MariaDB, and guacd are all set to start automatically every time we reboot or power on our computer. So we're gonna run systemctl, and then we're gonna enable Tomcat. We're gonna enable MariaDB. And we're gonna run systemctl enable guacd. Again, all this is doing is it's just gonna make sure that every time we boot our computer that these services start automatically. Next what we need to do is we need to copy our guacamole.war file into Tomcat's web directory. And we're gonna rename this to guacamole.war. Whoops. All right. Next, what we have to do is, by default, CentOS's firewall is pretty restrictive and blocks almost everything by default. So we need to open up our firewall to allow connections into Tomcat and Guacamole. So we're going to run firewall command. TAC permanent just makes it, as it sounds, permanent, so that when we reboot our computer that this firewall rule isn't lost. And it talks over port 8080, and it's a TCP port. All right, great. So we had success. So now all we have to do is just reload the firewall service. So TAC reload. Okay, awesome. So our firewall is now reloaded. Next, what we're going to do is we're just going to make a directory. We're going to actually make two directories in user share tomcat.guacamole. So we're going to create an extensions folder and a lib folder. Whoops. Okay, and just to make sure they created correctly, we can ls tomcat.guac. And there we go. Extensions and lib are both inside of Tomcat now. So what we need next is the MySQL connector, the Java applet. So we're gonna wget that from the MySQL servers. So we're gonna use, in this guide I'm using version 8.0.18, but a newer version should work fine. And so we need to extract that file now. And now what we need to do is copy the MySQL connector, the jar file, into user share tomcat guacamole into that lib folder we created earlier. Okay. Next, what we need to do is we need to wget the JDBC authenticator module for Guacamole. So this is coming from the Apache servers, and this is version 1.1 again. Just make sure your version, if you're doing this later, that your version matches whatever version of Guacamole we're installing. Now we need to extract it. And finally, we're going to copy the Guacamole authenticator module into the Tomcat directory. But this time it's going to go into the extensions folder. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're actually going to start MariaDB and Tomcat. Okay, so what we need to do next is secure MySQL. So by default, MySQL is not in a very secure state. It's normally like in a developer debug kind of mode. So we're going to run MySQL secure installation. So first thing it's going to say is please enter your root password. If you've never done this before, you probably don't have a root password. You should just press enter for none. And then it's going to ask if you want to set a root password. We're going to say yes. So for this guide, I'm going to use guac demo as my root password. Whatever you pick, just make sure you remember it because we're going to need it for later steps. Next, it's going to ask if we want to remove anonymous accounts, which we do want to remove. Yes. Yes, we want to disallow root login remotely. And yes, we want to remove the test database. And finally, yeah, we do want to reload our privilege tables. Okay. So next what we're going to do is we're going to actually log into MySQL. And it's asking for a password. This is a password you just created a second ago. So for us, it's guac demo. All right, so now that we're in MySQL or MariaDB, we need to run a couple SQL commands to prep our database so that Guacamole can actually utilize it to store connection and user account information. So we're going to create a database called guacdb. And then we're going to grant some permissions so that the guac user with that password can actually do certain actions on that database. Finally, we're going to flush our privileges. And then we just need to quit. All right, so next what we're going to do is we're going to, again, run wget. And we're going to download the Apache client, or I'm sorry, the Guacamole client. We're going to extract that. And what we're going to do next is we're going to cat a file. So there's a file inside of here that contains some SQL instructions or SQL commands that we need to use to set up the last couple steps in our database. There's actually 2 files in here. So what we're going to do instead of just real quick, we're going to use star.sql so that any SQL file is going to automatically be catted. And then we're going to pipe that to MySQL. And this is going to be, these are going to affect the guacdb database. So again, use that MySQL password we created in the previous steps. For me, again, that's guac demo. All right, with any luck, those went through and you're successful. Okay, so what we need to do next is we need to make a directory in Etsy. We're going to create a guacamole directory inside of Etsy. And now we're going to use VI, and we're going to create a file inside of that guacamole folder called guacamole.properties. Just make sure I spelled everything correctly. Okay. So I'm going to copy and paste this in here and we'll talk through it real quick. All right, so this is just going to contain some information so that Guacamole knows how to actually connect to and utilize the MySQL database we have running. So it's got the username, the database name, the password, and some other stuff. So again, in the previous steps, if you want to go and change some of this information, like your password and username, you're welcome to do that. For this demo, we're just going to leave all this how it is. But this is where Guacamole gets the information to know how to connect to the database. Okay, so now we just have a little bit of cleanup we need to do. So first thing we need to do is just change the permissions on Etsy guacamole.properties. So this makes it read-only for the actual file owner. And we're going to set the file owner now to Tomcat. So only the Tomcat service is able to access the information from this guacamole properties file. And we can just double check to make sure that actually worked. You know, ls-alh, Etsy guacamole. And we can see that, in fact, they are only read permissions, and Tomcat is the user that has the permissions to read this file. Next, we need to do is we need to create a symbolic link from the guacamole properties file into user share tomcat.guacamole. Okay. And then our last kind of cleanup step is going to be to change the ownership to Tomcat of the war file in var lib tomcat web apps guacamole.war. All right. Now, in order for MySQL to communicate correctly with the Guacamole service, we have one other thing we need to do. So if we go into etsy my.conf, so we're going to add a line in here. And so what we're going to do is set the default time zone equal. And so for me, I'm on Eastern time in the US, so I'm going to use -4. That's my offset. Just, you can go Google it and figure out what your offset is and go ahead and plug it in there. And that just allows MySQL and Guacamole to talk correctly. Otherwise, you'll probably run into an error where it'll say that it can't connect because you don't have a valid time zone. Okay. Now, last but certainly not least, we need to deal with SELinux. Since we're on CentOS, SELinux is a great security feature, but it also can cause some services not to run correctly. So you have two options. You can either just disable it outright, which isn't the best method because you lose a lot of the benefits of having SELinux on your system. So instead what we're going to do is we're just going to tweak it a little bit so that it'll allow Tomcat to work correctly, but not turn off SELinux all the way. So what we're going to do first is run set sebool tag p tomcat can network connect db on. And so that was successful. And then we just need to run restore con. Okay, so we should be pretty much done at this point. So what I'm going to do now is reboot my VM. And then as that reboots, once it's back up, our SSH connection should restore itself. Okay, great. So the system's back up. So now we're going to open a browser. And we're going to navigate so you need your IP address of the VM you're working on or the machine you're working on. So for me, it's 10.0.2.229 if you run IPA. And it's going to be port 8080 and then /guacamole. So if you were successful and everything went according to the steps we laid out, you should be met with this login screen. So by default, Guacamole's username and password are both guac admin, and it's the same thing for the password. Okay, so great. So that means MySQL database is working, the MySQL server, everything can talk if you can actually log in with those credentials. So that means everything's working. So what we'll do real quick, just kind of demonstrate how this works, is I'll go up to here and go to settings, and I'm going to go to connections. So this is where you create connections to various machines in your network, so you can utilize Guacamole. So we'll go create a new connection, just kind of as a demo. We'll do Windows 10 demo. We're going to use RDP since it's Windows. And then what I'm going to do for host name for the network, I'm going to set that to my IP address of this Windows VM I have running .6.13, and RDP communicates normally over port 3389. Give it a username, and and then a password. So make sure you go and click Ignore Server Certificate. That'll give you issues if you don't do that. And awesome. So we're now logged in, and we have access to our Windows machine through our web browser. So it's a really powerful tool. It also has the ability to copy and paste. So if you copy text from, if you copy text from your host environment, you can then paste it into this little box here. And then if we launch Notepad, we can actually paste our text right into there. So Guacamole is a really powerful tool. Hope you all enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please subscribe and press that like button, and I'll see you guys next time.